The airplane galley was barely large enough for two people, but Elliot pressed Naira against the narrow counter anyway, his hands tangling in her hair as 4 years of separation collapsed into a single, desperate kiss. "I looked for you," he breathed against her lips, his voice raw with emotion. "After Miami, I hired investigators, searched every database, attended every tech conference, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. You disappeared. I had to—" Her fingers clutched at his shirt, torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. "I was pregnant, Elliot, with twins." The words hit him like a physical blow. He pulled back, studying her face with new understanding. "The girls in 12A, Raya and Rena. Your daughters, my daughters." The words fell from his lips like a prayer. "You were pregnant when you left Miami. I was pregnant when you chose Tokyo over us." The accusation hung between them in the cramped space, years of pain and longing crystallizing into this moment. He could hear the twins' laughter through the thin galley door, could picture their faces, so much like his own, so much like the woman who'd haunted his dreams. "I made the wrong choice," he said, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I choose you now. I choose them. I choose us. It's too late." "It's never too late." Then his mouth was on hers again, hungry and desperate, pouring 4 years of regret and longing into a kiss that tasted like tears and second chances. She melted against him, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. "Hello, family. This is your Dr. Phillips." I had to pause here so we could dive straight into the story. But before we begin, please do me a simple favor. Hit the subscribe button, like and share this story with your loved ones. It tells YouTube that stories like this matters. Now let's continue. The cabin hummed with mechanical precision, exactly how Elliot Vaughn preferred his world. 37,000 feet above ground, cocooned in first-class leather, he savored the rare luxury of silence. No board meetings, no acquisition deals, no desperate assistants clutching urgent files. Just him, his MacBook, and the gentle thrum of engines carrying him from Seattle to New York. He adjusted his noise-canceling headphones and returned to the quarterly reports glowing on his screen. Numbers never lied. They followed rules. They made sense. Unlike people, Elliot had built his empire on predictability. Vaughtech didn't just create software, it created order from chaos. His algorithms could predict market fluctuations, consumer behavior, even relationship compatibility. Everything quantifiable, everything controlled. The flight attendant approached with practiced grace. "Another whiskey, Mr. Vaughn?" "Please." He didn't look up from his screen. Social interaction required energy he preferred to conserve. She refilled his glass with aged bourbon, the good stuff they reserved for passengers who could buy the entire airline. Elliot appreciated quality, but more than that, he appreciated the barrier wealth created. Money meant distance. Distance meant control. The cabin door opened. A burst of wailing shattered his carefully constructed peace. 2 identical voices, harmonizing in distress, filled the space like a siren's call. Elliot's fingers froze over his keyboard. His jaw tightened. "I'm so sorry," a flight attendant whispered to someone just outside his peripheral vision. "There was a mechanical issue with the economy cabin. We had to move a few passengers." The crying intensified. Elliot's left eye twitched, a stress response he'd trained himself to suppress in boardrooms but couldn't quite eliminate. He reached for his headphones, cranking the volume higher. Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 should drown out the chaos. It didn't. The wailing continued, punctuated by soft shushing sounds and a woman's voice, strained but patient. "Shh, babies. I know you're tired. We'll be home soon." Home. The word hit him oddly. Elliot owned 17 properties across 4 continents, but none of them felt like home. They were investments, status symbols, places to sleep between conquests. He risked a glance across the aisle. 2 toddlers, maybe 3 years old, sat in oversized first-class seats that dwarfed their tiny frames. Identical dark curls framed tear-streaked faces. One rubbed her eyes with chubby fists while the other hiccuped between sobs. It wasn't their distress that made Elliot's blood freeze. It was the birthmarks. Each girl bore an identical crescent-shaped mark on her left shoulder, a distinctive curve that looked like a new moon etched in caramel against their bronze skin. The marks were visible through their thin cotton dresses, impossible to miss. Elliot's hand moved instinctively to his own left shoulder, where beneath his custom shirt lay the exact same birthmark. A genetic quirk his mother had called God's signature. She'd traced it with her finger when he was small, telling him it meant he was destined for greatness. The whiskey turned to acid in his throat. The girls shared more than just the birthmark. Their bone structure, the curve of their noses, even the way the smaller one tilted her head when she cried. It was like looking at feminine versions of his own childhood photos. "Ma'am, can I get anything for your daughters?" The flight attendant's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Daughters." The word ricocheted through his skull. "Just some water, please." The mother's voice was soft but weary. "And maybe some crackers if you have them." Elliot still couldn't see her face, but something about her voice made his chest constrict. A melody he'd heard before, in dreams that felt more real than his waking hours. The smaller twin, the one who'd been rubbing her eyes, suddenly stopped crying. She turned in her seat, large brown eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on him. Those eyes, coffee dark with flecks of gold, framed by lashes that belonged in a Renaissance painting. They were eyes he'd stared into during the most intense weekend of his life, 4 years ago in Miami. The little girl studied him with unsettling intensity, as if she could see straight through his carefully constructed walls. Then she smiled, a gap-toothed grin that punched through his defenses like a freight train. "Mama," she whispered, tugging on someone's sleeve. "That man looks like us." Elliot's laptop slipped from his numb fingers. The woman in the opposite seat turned around, and the world stopped. Naira. 4 years melted away in an instant. 4 years of searching, of private investigators, of sleepless nights wondering if he'd imagined the connection they'd shared. 4 years of telling himself he was better off alone. She was more beautiful than his memory had preserved. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a practical bun that revealed the elegant line of her neck. She'd lost weight, too much weight, but her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had captivated him from the moment they met. Those same eyes now stared at him with a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked like pain. Elliot. His name fell from her lips like a prayer or a curse. The larger twin had stopped crying too, distracted by the sudden tension crackling between the adults. She looked back and forth between them, her young mind trying to process the electricity in the air. "Are these—" Elliot's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Are they mine?" The question hung in the recycled air like a loaded gun. Naira's face went carefully blank, the same expression she'd worn when she'd walked out of his Miami hotel room without a word, without a number, without a trace. "Girls," she said quietly, never breaking eye contact with him, "put on your headphones. Watch your movie." The twins obeyed with the practiced ease of children accustomed to adult conversations they weren't meant to hear. "4 years," Elliot said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I looked for you. Did you—" Her tone was neutral, but he caught the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her younger daughter's hair. "Or did you look for someone to fill the space I left?" The accusation hit its mark. He'd looked for her, but he'd also tried to replace her. Dozens of women, all beautiful, all intelligent, all completely wrong. "They have my birthmark," he said. "Lots of people have birthmarks. Not like this one." Naira's composure cracked for just a moment. He saw her glance at the twins' shoulders, saw the slight tightening around her eyes. "What do you want me to say, Elliot? That you're right? That these are your daughters? That I've been raising them alone while you built your empire?" The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than any blade. "If they're mine, if—" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There's no if. There's only the choice you made 4 years ago when you made it crystal clear what mattered more to you than us." The smaller twin pulled off her headphones. "Mama, why are you sad?" Naira's entire demeanor shifted, her face softening as she turned to her daughter. "I'm not sad, baby, just tired. Put your headphones back on." But the little girl was still staring at Elliot. "He has the same eyes as Raya." Raya. His daughter had a name. "And the same nose as Rena," the other twin added, pointing to her sister and then to herself. Rena. 2 daughters. The reality hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been conquering markets and accumulating wealth, Naira had been raising their children alone. Their children, who knew nothing about him but could see their own features reflected in his face. "We need to talk," he said. "No." Naira's voice was firm. "We needed to talk 4 years ago. Now we need to focus on getting through this flight." But even as she said it, Elliot caught her stealing glances at him. Caught the way her breath hitched when their eyes met. Caught the way she unconsciously touched her collarbone, the same spot he used to kiss until she trembled beneath him. The connection was still there, humming beneath the surface like a live wire. Outside the windows, stars painted the darkness in patterns older than human language. Inside the cabin, 3 lives hung in the balance, waiting for someone brave enough to bridge the gap between past and present. Elliot closed his laptop and buckled his seatbelt. He wasn't going anywhere. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Naira's hands trembled as she adjusted Raya's blanket, her maternal instincts warring with the storm of emotions Elliot's presence had unleashed. He studied her profile, the delicate curve of her jawline, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident she told him about during their Miami weekend. Every detail flooded back with devastating clarity. "You cut your hair," he said softly. Her fingers moved unconsciously to the shorter strands that now barely grazed her shoulders. "It was practical. You loved your long hair. I loved a lot of things." The words carried weight, accusation wrapped in silk. Things change when you have to survive instead of just exist. Rena pulled at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm thirsty." Naira reached for her purse, retrieving a small juice box with practiced efficiency. As she helped her daughter with the straw, Elliot caught sight of her hands, no longer the soft manicured hands he remembered. These were working hands, with tiny scars and calluses that spoke of struggles he'd never had to face. "You're staring," she said without looking at him. "I'm remembering." "Don't." The word came out sharper than intended, causing both twins to glance up. Naira softened her voice. "Some memories are better left buried." But Elliot couldn't stop remembering. The way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes during that tech conference in Miami. How she'd challenged every assumption he made about artificial intelligence, holding her own against his entire development team. The way she'd felt in his arms that first night, like she was made to fit against him. "I tried to find you," he said again, leaning slightly into the aisle. "You tried to find the woman who made you feel something." Her voice was barely audible above the engine noise. "Not the woman who needed you to be something." The accusation hit home. He had searched for her, but had he been looking for Naira the person, or Naira the feeling? The distinction suddenly seemed crucial. "Tell me about them," he said, nodding toward the twins. Naira's protective instincts flared. "Why?" "So you can add them to your collection of acquisitions." "Because they're mine." "They're mine?" Her voice carried the fierce protectiveness of a mother who'd fought every battle alone. "I carried them. I delivered them. I held them through every fever, every nightmare, every milestone you missed." The pain in her voice was raw, unfiltered. Elliot felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart to protect himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. "Raya spoke her first word at 8 months, Naira continued, her voice gaining strength. "It was Mama. Rena took her first steps at 10 months, right into my arms. They both love strawberry pancakes but hate banana anything. Raya has your stubborn striae K, and Rena has your way of watching people like she's solving a puzzle." Each detail felt like a gift and a punishment simultaneously. These were his daughters, and he'd missed everything. "What was their first word?" he asked. "I just told you." "No, I mean, did they ever ask about their father?" Naira's composure wavered. She glanced at the twins, who were absorbed in their tablets, then back at him. "Every day." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. "What did you tell them?" "That their daddy was very busy with important work." Her smile was bitter. "Turns out I wasn't lying." Elliot's throat tightened. "Naira, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't you dare apologize now. Not here, not like this." But he could see the tears she was fighting, the way her breath came in careful, measured doses. The woman who'd once fearlessly debated quantum computing theory was barely holding herself together. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said. "Thinking about me, or thinking about that weekend." The question forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. Had he been mourning the loss of Naira, or the loss of how she'd made him feel? The distinction mattered more than he'd realized. "Both," he admitted. She turned to face him fully for the first time since recognizing him. The movement was deliberate, calculated, like she was preparing for battle. "Do you remember what you said to me that last morning?" How could he forget? The words had haunted him for 4 years. "I said I had to get back to reality." "No." Her voice was steady now, surgical in its precision. "You said you had to get back to what mattered. And when I asked if what we'd shared mattered, you said it was complicated." The memory twisted in his gut like a knife. He'd been 28, drunk on success and terrified of anything that might derail his carefully planned trajectory. She'd been 24, brilliant and beautiful, and offering him something he'd been too frightened to accept. "I was scared," he said. "Of what?" "Of you. Of how you made me feel. Of losing control. So you chose to lose me instead." The truth of it was devastating. He'd chosen the predictable path, the safe path, the path that led to billions of dollars and an empty penthouse overlooking a city full of strangers. "I was building something," he said weakly. "We were building something." Her voice cracked slightly. "At least, I thought we were." Raya looked up from her tablet, sensing the tension. "Mama, why are you sad again?" Naira immediately shifted into mom mode, her face brightening with forced cheer. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just talking with an old friend. Is he why you sometimes cry at night?" The innocent question hit both adults like a physical blow. Naira's face went pale, while Elliot felt like he'd been punched in the solar plexus. "Sometimes grown-ups cry because they're tired," Naira said gently. "Just like you cry when you're tired. But you cry different. Like when you miss Grandma." Elliot watched Naira's careful composure crumble. Her mother had died 2 years ago. He'd seen the obituary during one of his many internet searches for any trace of her. She'd faced that loss alone too, with no one to lean on except 2 toddlers who needed her to be strong. "I did miss someone," Naira whispered, her eyes finding his. "But sometimes people can't be found." "Are you going to miss him when we get off the plane?" Rena asked, her child's intuition cutting straight to the heart of the matter. The question hung in the air like a dare. Elliot held his breath, waiting for her answer. "I don't know, baby. Sometimes people come back into our lives when we least expect it. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know that either." The honesty in her answer broke something open in Elliot's chest. Here was the woman who'd captivated him in Miami, brilliant, complex, unafraid of uncertainty. The same woman who'd walked away from him because he'd been too cowardly to embrace the unknown. "The girls are tired," Naira said, deflecting back to safer ground. "It's way past their bedtime." "Let me help," Elliot said, surprising himself. "We don't need help. Maybe I need to help." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Naira studied his face, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or proof that he'd changed. "You can't just decide to be their father because you feel guilty," she said finally. "I'm not deciding anything. I'm asking what? For a chance to know them, to know you again. You had a chance 4 years ago. I was different then. People don't change, Elliot. They just reveal who they really are." The judgment in her voice stung because it felt deserved. But looking at his daughters, their daughters, he felt something shift inside him. A gravitational pull toward a life he'd never allowed himself to want. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But maybe some revelations are worth waiting for." For the first time since boarding, Naira's expression softened slightly. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the faintest possibility of it. "Don't break their hearts," she whispered. "They've been through enough. What about your heart?" The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and desperate. Naira's breath caught. For a moment, her carefully constructed walls wavered, and he saw the woman who'd once trusted him with her secrets, her body, her dreams of tomorrow. "My heart learned to stop expecting miracles," she said. But even as she said it, Elliot caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way her fingers moved to her throat, the same nervous gesture she'd made in Miami when he told her she was beautiful. Maybe hearts, like people, were more resilient than either of them had imagined. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight flight, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Most passengers had settled into sleep, but Elliot sat rigid in his leather seat, every nerve ending on fire. His quarterly reports lay forgotten on his tray table, numbers meaningless compared to the living equations across the aisle. Naira moved with quiet efficiency, tucking blankets around the twins and adjusting their pillows. She'd braided their hair while they slept, intricate plaits that spoke of practiced hands and patient love. Everything about her movements screamed competence, but Elliot could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward his seat when she thought he wasn't looking. He was always looking. 4 years of searching, of hiring private investigators who'd turned up nothing, of scanning every tech conference and coding meetup for a glimpse of her face. She'd vanished from his life like smoke, leaving only the memory of her laugh and the way she'd traced patterns on his chest in the dark. Now she was 30 feet away, and he couldn't breathe properly. His phone buzzed with emails from Tokyo, urgent messages about the merger that had consumed the last 6 months. The same merger that had made him $30 billion richer and somehow emptier than ever. He'd built Vauntech into a global empire, but sitting here watching Naira mother their children, he felt like he'd conquered the wrong world. She whispered something to Raya, who nodded sleepily and snuggled deeper into her blanket. The tender gesture made Elliot's chest ache. This was what he'd missed, not just the milestones and first words, but the quiet moments that built the foundation of love. Sir. The flight attendant appeared beside him, voice professionally hushed. Can I get you anything? Another whiskey? No. The word came out rougher than intended. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. He was drowning in regret and possibility, watching the woman who'd haunted his dreams tend to children who shared his DNA and called someone else daddy in their sleep. Because that's what they must do. Call out for a father figure who existed only in their imagination. Naira straightened, her back to him, and rolled her shoulders like she was carrying the weight of the world. Maybe she was. Single motherhood, freelance work, no family support system. He'd learned enough from his investigators to know her life hadn't been easy. She turned slightly, catching him watching her. For a moment, their eyes met across the dim cabin, and the years collapsed between them. He saw the girl who'd debated quantum theory with him over room service, who'd made him laugh until his sides hurt, who'd looked at him like he was capable of being more than just successful. Then she turned away, building her walls higher. Elliot unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, blood rushing to his head. He needed air, space, anything to stop the memories from flooding back. The Miami conference, her presentation on machine learning ethics, the way she'd held her own against his entire development team, how she'd looked in that blue dress at the welcome dinner, confident and radiant and completely unaware of her effect on him. He headed toward the back of the cabin, hoping to find some solitude in the galley. But as he passed their row, Raya stirred. Mama, she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. Shh, baby. Go back to sleep. But Raya was sitting up now, her dark eyes tracking Elliot's movement. She studied him with the same intensity he'd noticed earlier, like she was solving a complex equation. You're the man from before, she said quietly. Elliot stopped walking, his heart hammering against his ribs. Yes, you smell like us. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd noticed it too, the faint scent of lavender and something uniquely feminine that seemed to cling to Naira's skin. But he hadn't realized it. Was something the girls would recognize, something genetic and primal that connected them. Raya, Naira's voice carried a warning, but her daughter was already sliding out of her seat. Can I smell you again? The innocence of the request broke something open in Elliot's chest. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. If that's okay with your mom. Naira looked like she wanted to refuse, but Raya was already moving closer, her small hands reaching for his shirt. She pressed her nose against his chest, inhaling deeply. You do smell like us, she announced with the satisfaction of a scientist confirming a hypothesis. And you have the same hands as Mama. Elliot looked down at his hands, then at Naira's. He'd never noticed the similarity before. The long fingers, the way they both gestured when they talked, the small scar on the left index finger from childhood accidents. Raya, come back to your seat, Naira said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is he our daddy? Raya asked. The question so direct it seemed to suck the air from the cabin. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elliot felt the weight of the moment, the crossroads where his answer would determine everything that came after. I might be, he said finally, the words careful and honest. Where have you been? The question came from Rena, who'd been quietly listening from her seat. Her voice held no accusation, just curiosity, but it cut deeper than any anger could have. I've been looking for you, Elliot said, surprised by the raw honesty in his own voice. I've been looking for all of you. Were we hiding? No, baby, Naira said softly. We were just living somewhere else. Raya reached for Elliot's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his thumb. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that he felt tears prick his eyes. Are you going to live with us now? She asked. The hope in her voice was devastating. These children, who'd never known him, were ready to accept him into their world with the boundless faith of innocence. Meanwhile, their mother watched with the wariness of someone who'd learned that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. I don't know, Elliot said truthfully. That would be up to your mama. Both girls turned to look at Naira, whose face had gone carefully neutral. She was protecting herself, protecting them, from the possibility of disappointment. Mama cries sometimes, Rena said matter-of-factly. When she thinks we're asleep. Rena, She looks at pictures on her phone and gets sad. Pictures of a man who looks like you. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Naira's face flushed, caught between embarrassment and something that looked like longing. She kept pictures? Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Just one, Naira said quietly. From the conference dinner. He remembered that photo. The official conference photographer had captured them mid-laugh, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder. They'd looked like they belonged together. I kept it for them, she added quickly, so they'd know what you looked like. But Elliot heard the lie in her voice, saw the way her fingers moved unconsciously to her phone. She'd kept it for herself, just like he'd kept the business card with her handwriting on it, the one he'd carried in his wallet for 4 years like a talisman. I have pictures too, he admitted. Of us, of that weekend, of you laughing at something I said, of you sleeping in my shirt the last morning. The memory made her breath catch. She'd looked so peaceful in his arms, her hair spread across his chest, her legs tangled with his. He'd watched her sleep and thought about forever for the first time in his life. You should have called, she whispered. I tried. Your number was disconnected. I changed it. I know. The conversation was becoming too intimate for the public setting, too raw for the twins' innocent ears. But Elliot couldn't stop himself from moving closer, drawn by the magnetic pull that had never fully faded. I should have tried harder, he said. You should have tried at all. The accusation stung because it was true. He'd made token efforts, but he'd also told himself that if she'd wanted to be found, she would have made it easier. He'd used her silence as permission to move on, to bury his feelings under work and success and the comfortable numbness of emotional distance. I was a coward, he said. You were practical. Her voice held bitter admiration. You chose the path that made sense. I chose the path that felt safe. Same thing. Raya tugged on his sleeve, pulling him back to the present. Are you going to make Mama cry again? The question was so direct, so protective, that Elliot felt his throat tighten. These children barely knew him, but they were already defending their mother from potential harm. I hope not, he said honestly. Good. She cries too much already. Raya. Naira's voice held gentle reproach, but her daughter was undeterred. She does, and she works too hard, and she doesn't eat enough vegetables even though she makes us eat them. Despite everything, Elliot smiled. She was always terrible at taking care of herself. You remember that? I remember everything. The admission slipped out before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable. Naira's eyes widened, and for a moment, her careful mask slipped. He saw the girl who trusted him with her secrets, her body, her dreams of tomorrow. Girls, back to your seats, she said softly. It's time to sleep. But neither twin moved. They seemed to sense the importance of the moment, the way their parents' history was being rewritten in real time. I want to know him, Raya said quietly. Me too, Rena added. The simple declaration nearly brought Elliot to his knees. These children, who owed him nothing, were offering him everything. That's not my decision to make alone, Naira said carefully. But it's not mine to make alone either, Elliot replied. Their eyes met across the space between them, and for a moment, the past 4 years disappeared. He saw the woman who'd challenged him to be better, who'd made him believe in something beyond profit margins and market share. I need some air, Naira said suddenly, standing. Can you watch them for a moment? The request was unprecedented, a crack in her armor of self-reliance. Elliot nodded, settling into the aisle as she moved toward the back of the plane. He was alone with his daughters for the first time in their lives. Tell us about yourself, Raya said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside him. What do you want to know? Everything. The word hung between them like a promise and a dare. Everything. His whole life, laid bare for 2 3-year-olds who just wanted to know their father. Maybe it was time to start telling the truth. The galley was a sanctuary of shadows and stainless steel, tucked away from the sleeping passengers like a confessional booth at 37,000 feet. Naira stood with her back to the narrow entrance, her shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining control. Elliot found her there 10 minutes later, after settling the twins back into their seats with promises of stories and answers when they woke. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her reflection in the polished surface of the coffee machine, eyes closed, breathing carefully measured. They're asleep, he said quietly. They like you. Her voice was barely audible above the engine's hum. They shouldn't, but they do. Is that so terrible? She turned then, and the pain in her eyes nearly staggered him. It's cruel. You'll be gone in a few hours, back to your empire and your important meetings, and they'll ask about you every day until they forget what you look like. Who says I'll be gone? Please don't. She pressed her palms against her temples. Don't make promises you can't keep. I won't put them through that. The space between them felt charged, electric with years of unspoken words. Elliot moved closer, drawn by the magnetic pull that had never fully faded. I looked for you, he said again, but this time the words carried weight, desperation. Not just for a few weeks or months. For 4 years, Naira. I hired investigators, scoured social media, attended every tech conference hoping to catch a glimpse of you. You looked for the ghost of a weekend. I looked for the woman who made me believe in something beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. She laughed, but the sound was hollow. You found that woman right here, apparently, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, freelancing coding jobs for startups that can barely afford to pay me. The bitterness in her voice cut deep. He'd imagined her life had continued on some parallel track to his, successful, fulfilling, just elsewhere. The reality was far harsher. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. She stepped closer, and he could see the exhaustion etched in fine lines around her eyes. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to romanticize what we had than to face what it actually meant. What did it mean? The question hung between them like a dare. Naira's breath caught, and for a moment, her carefully constructed walls wavered. It meant I fell in love with a man who was terrified of anything he couldn't control, she whispered. It meant I trusted you with pieces of myself I'd never shared with anyone else. It meant I believed you when you said you'd never met anyone like me. You haven't. Then why did you let me walk away? The question was a knife to his chest. He'd asked himself the same thing thousands of times, usually at 3 a.m. when his empty penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Because I was 28 years old and terrified of failing at something that mattered, he said. Because my father spent his whole life chasing get-rich-quick schemes and left my mother with nothing but debt and broken promises. Because I thought if I could just build something solid first, something that couldn't be taken away, then maybe I'd be worthy of what you were offering. I wasn't offering you a business proposal, Elliot. I was offering you my heart. I know. His voice cracked. I know that now. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles went white. Do you have any idea what it was like? Finding out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you made it clear I was a complication in your perfectly planned life. The image hit him like a physical blow. Naira, alone and scared, staring at a positive pregnancy test while he was probably in some boardroom celebrating another acquisition. I sat in my car outside the clinic for 3 hours, she continued, her voice steady but strained. 3 hours, trying to decide if I was brave enough to do it alone. The clinic? I was going to. She swallowed hard. I was 24 years old, Elliot. I had student loans and a job that barely paid rent. I thought about ending it. The confession stole the breath from his lungs. His daughters, those beautiful, brilliant girls who'd accepted him so readily, had almost never existed because he'd been too much of a coward to fight for their mother. But you didn't. No, I didn't. She turned back to face him, and the strength in her voice was devastating. I decided I was done letting men determine my worth. I was done waiting for someone else to decide I was worth staying for. Naira. I delivered them alone. 22 hours of labor, no epidural because I couldn't afford the anesthesia, and when they finally came, her voice broke. When they finally came, they were so perfect, so beautiful, and all I could think was how much you were missing. Tears ran freely down her cheeks now, years of buried pain finally surfacing. Elliot reached for her instinctively, but she stepped back. Don't touch me and make this harder than it already is. It doesn't have to be hard. Everything with you is hard. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Even now, I can feel myself wanting to believe you've changed. That this time might be different. I have changed. Have you? Or are you just feeling guilty because you got caught? The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. Would he have sought them out if he hadn't literally run into them on this plane? Would he have ever been brave enough to disrupt his carefully ordered life? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I needed to see you again to realize what I'd lost. You didn't lose anything, Elliot. You threw it away. Then let me pick up the pieces. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or proof that he'd evolved beyond the man who'd chosen safety over love. I can't, she whispered. I can't go through that again. The girls can't go through that. You won't have to. You don't understand. She pressed her palms against her eyes. I hate that I still want you. I hate that 4 years of building my life without you can be undone by one look. I hate that my daughters need their father and I'm too scared to let them have him. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. But Elliot was already moving, drawn by the raw honesty in her voice. I'm scared too, he said, close enough now to touch her. I'm terrified of failing them the way I failed you. You didn't fail me. You just chose differently. I chose wrong. She looked up at him then, and he saw the girl who'd trusted him with her secrets, her body, her dreams of tomorrow. The same girl who'd walked away rather than settle for less than she deserved. I missed you, she whispered. Every day for 4 years I missed you. I'm here now. For how long? The question was fair, necessary, but he didn't have an answer that would satisfy either of them. All he had was the truth. I don't know, he said. I don't know anything except that I can't walk away from you again. You walked away before. I was different then. Prove it. The challenge in her voice made his blood sing. This was the Naira he remembered, brilliant, fearless, unafraid to demand what she was worth. He reached for her then, his hands framing her face, thumbs tracing the tear tracks on her cheeks. I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving it if you'll let me. Elliot, I love you. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and desperate. I loved you 4 years ago, and I've loved you every day since, even when I was too stupid to fight for you. Her breath caught. Don't say that. It's true. It's not enough. Then what is? She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw the exact moment she made her decision. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Show me, she whispered. The kiss was inevitable as gravity, 4 years of longing compressed into a single point of contact. Her lips were soft and familiar, tasting of coffee and tears and the same promise he'd been too frightened to accept in Miami. He pulled her closer, his hands threading through her hair, and she melted against him like she was coming home. The kiss deepened, became desperate, years of separation dissolving in the heat between them. I hate you, she breathed against his mouth. I know. I hate that you left. I know. I hate that I still need you. I need you too. Her hands were everywhere then, tracing the muscles of his shoulders, the line of his jaw, the chest she'd mapped with her fingers and tongue during their weekend together. He lifted her onto the narrow counter, stepping between her legs, and she wrapped around him like she was claiming him. We can't, she whispered, even as she pulled him closer. I know. The girls are asleep. Someone could. No one will. His mouth found the sensitive spot below her ear, and she arched against him with a soft moan that sent fire through his veins. This was what he'd missed, not just the physical connection, but the way she trusted him with her vulnerability, the way she let him see her completely undone. Elliot, she gasped as his hands skimmed her sides, relearning the curve of her waist, the softness of her skin. I'm here, he murmured against her throat. I'm here, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't enough. Being here in this moment wasn't the same as being here for all the moments that mattered. Still, he couldn't stop himself from memorizing every detail, the way her pulse fluttered under his lips, the small sounds she made when he touched her just right, the way she whispered his name like a prayer. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes dark with desire and something that looked like surrender. This changes everything, she said. Good. I can't promise you anything. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance. She searched his face, looking for something, hope perhaps, or the man she'd once believed he could become. One chance, she whispered. One chance. The kiss that sealed the bargain was softer than the ones before, full of tentative hope and the terrifying possibility of second chances. The walk back to their seats felt like crossing a minefield. Every step carried the weight of what had just happened, the memory of Naira's lips still burning against his, the way she'd whispered his name like a broken prayer. The cabin was darker now, most passengers lost in sleep, but Elliot felt exposed, like every flight attendant could see the guilt and desire written across his face. Naira moved ahead of him, her posture rigid with the effort of rebuilding her walls. She'd straightened her hair, smoothed her clothes, but he could still see the flush across her collarbone, the slight tremor in her hands as she checked on the twins. Both girls were sleeping peacefully. Raya curled on her side with her thumb near her mouth. Rena sprawled across her seat like she owned the world. They looked so innocent, so trusting, unaware that their parents had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Thank you, Naira whispered, as she settled back into her seat, not looking at him. For watching them. They're easy to watch. The banality of the conversation felt absurd after what they'd shared in the galley. But what was the alternative? Discussing the way she'd arched against him, the desperate sounds she'd made when he'd touched her throat. Elliot reclaimed his seat across the aisle, hyper-aware of every movement she made, the way she tucked her legs beneath her, how she kept stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. The air between them crackled with unfinished business. He tried to focus on his laptop, but the quarterly reports might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. All he could think about was the taste of her tears, the way she'd fisted his shirt like she was drowning and he was her only anchor. "This was a mistake," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the engine noise. "Which part?" "All of it. The kiss, the everything. I can't think clearly when you're around." He wanted to tell her that thinking clearly was overrated, that some things were worth the risk of losing control. But he could see the fear in her eyes, the way she kept glancing at their daughters like she was calculating potential casualties. "I should have stayed away," he said. "You didn't know we'd be here. I meant 4 years ago. I should have stayed away from you completely." She turned to face him then, and the pain in her expression nearly broke him. "Is that what you wish? That we'd never met?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Did he wish that? It would have been easier, certainly. He'd still be successful, still be wealthy, still be empty. But he'd also never have known what it felt like to be completely understood by another person. "No," he said finally. "I wish I'd been braver." "Brave enough for what?" "To fight for you when it mattered." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light. "You know what I remember most about that weekend?" He held his breath, waiting. "Not the conference, or the presentations, or even the way you looked at me during dinner. I remember the morning after our first night together. You were still asleep, and I was lying there watching you, thinking about how different you looked when you weren't trying to impress anyone." The memory hit him like a physical blow. He'd woken to find her tracing patterns on his chest, her hair spread across his pillow like dark silk. She'd looked so content, so trusting, like she belonged there. "You made me coffee," he said softly. "You remembered my order from the conference, welcome. Cappuccino, extra shot, no sugar. I couldn't believe you'd paid attention to something so small." He'd paid attention to everything about her. The way she laughed at her own jokes, how she argued with passion but never malice, the small scar on her chin from falling off her bike as a child. He'd memorized her like she was a language he needed to learn. "I brought you breakfast in bed," she continued, her voice growing softer. "Those ridiculously expensive strawberries from room service. You said you'd never had anyone take care of you like that." The confession made his throat tight. His mother had died when he was 16, and he'd spent the years since then building walls around his heart. But Naira had slipped through his defenses like smoke, making him believe he could be loved for who he was rather than what he'd achieved. "You asked me to stay another day," she said. "You said you had to get back to your real life. I was scared too." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I was 24 and falling in love with a man who seemed too good to be true. I thought if I played it cool, if I didn't seem too eager, you'd respect me more. I was already planning to extend my trip." "What?" "I was going to ask you to stay the whole week, show you Miami, take you to that little Cuban place I'd heard about. I had this whole fantasy about convincing you to move to Seattle, about building something real together." The pain in her eyes was devastating. "You never said any of that." "I was working up the courage. And then..." He closed his eyes, remembering. "My assistant called. The Tokyo deal was falling through, and I had to choose between flying there immediately or losing the biggest acquisition of my career. So, you chose Tokyo. I chose wrong." The words hung between them like a confession. He'd chosen the safe path, the predictable path, the path that led to billions of dollars and a life of carefully controlled solitude. "I waited for you to call," she said quietly. "For weeks I waited. I kept thinking maybe you'd realized what you'd given up. Maybe you'd fight for us. I thought about it every day. But you didn't do it." "No, I didn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of missed opportunities and roads not taken. Elliot watched Naira's profile as she gazed out the window at the star-scattered darkness below. "I dream about that weekend sometimes," she said eventually. "What do you dream about?" "The way you looked at me when I was talking about machine learning ethics. Like you were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. The way you laughed when I beat you at chess. How you held me afterward, like you were afraid I might disappear." "I was afraid you might disappear. I did disappear. Because I let you..." She turned back to him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I used to wonder what would have happened if you'd called. If you'd shown up at my apartment with flowers and apologies and promises to do better, would you have taken me back?" In a heartbeat. The admission was barely a whisper. "I would have forgiven you everything if you'd just tried." The knowledge was a knife to his chest. All those years of searching, of regret, of empty hotel rooms and meaningless acquisitions, all of it could have been avoided if he'd just been brave enough to pick up the phone. "I kept your business card," he said. "I kept your conference badge." The confession made him look at her with new eyes. She'd kept a piece of him, just like he'd kept a piece of her. They'd both been carrying the weight of that weekend, nursing the same wounds in silence. "The girls have your eyes," he said softly. "And your stubborn streak. Raya especially. She's been asking about her father since she learned to talk. Real questions, not just casual curiosity. She wants to know why he's not here, why other kids have daddies who pick them up from school." The image of his daughter waiting for a father who never came was devastating. "What do you tell her?" "That some people aren't ready to be parents, but that doesn't mean they don't love their children." "Do you believe that?" "I have to. The alternative is too painful." He watched her arrange Rena's blanket with careful precision, her maternal instincts on full display. She was a natural mother, patient, loving, fiercely protective. Everything his own mother had been before cancer stole her away. "I think about them every day," he said. "You didn't know they existed until tonight. I think about what our children would have been like, what kind of father I'd be, whether I'd be better than my own father was." "You couldn't be worse." The dry comment surprised a laugh out of him. "Thanks for the vote of confidence. I mean it. Your father may have been a disappointment, but you're not him. You're methodical, driven, successful. You build things instead of tearing them down. I tore us down. You were scared. There's a difference." The forgiveness in her voice was almost harder to bear than her anger. Anger he could fight against, could argue with, but forgiveness required him to forgive himself, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. "No one does. You figure it out as you go. What if I'm terrible at it?" "You won't be." She said it with such certainty that he almost believed her. "You're already better than you think. The way you talked to them tonight, the way you listened, that's not something you can fake. They're extraordinary. They're yours." The simple statement hit him like a revelation. They were his. These beautiful, brilliant girls who'd accepted him so readily, who'd seen through his carefully constructed walls to the man underneath. They were his daughters, and he'd already missed 3 years of their lives. "I want to be part of their lives," he said. "I know. I want to be part of your life too." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see the internal war playing out across her features. Hope battling fear, love wrestling with self-preservation. "I can't promise you anything," she said finally. "I'm not asking for promises." "Yes, you are. You're asking me to trust you with the most important things in my life. You're asking me to believe you've changed, that this time will be different." "I have changed. Have you? Or do you just think you have because you're feeling guilty?" The question was fair, necessary, but he didn't have an answer that would satisfy either of them. All he had was the truth. "I don't know," he said. "All I know is that I can't walk away from you again. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice, not always a good one." Outside the windows, the first faint traces of dawn were beginning to appear on the horizon. They'd be landing in New York soon, and then what? Would they exchange numbers and promise to stay in touch? Would he disappear back into his world of boardrooms and acquisitions while she returned to her life of single motherhood and financial struggle? "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't have, of letting my daughters get attached to someone who might leave, of falling in love with you all over again. You're not in love with me." "No." She looked at him with eyes that held 4 years of longing. Then what was that in the galley? He didn't have an answer for that either. All he knew was that kissing her had felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself he'd lost. "We land in 2 hours," she said quietly. "I know. And then what?" "I don't know. That's not good enough anymore, Elliot. I need more than I don't know. My daughters need more than that." She was right, of course. But how could he make promises when he didn't even know what he was promising? How could he guarantee he wouldn't hurt them again when he'd already proven himself capable of walking away? "I'll figure it out," he said. "You better. Because if you break their hearts, I'll never forgive you." "What about your heart?" "My heart stopped being your concern 4 years ago." But even as she said it, He could see the lie in her eyes. Her heart was still his concern, still his responsibility, still the most precious thing she could offer him. The plane began its descent toward JFK, and Elliot felt the weight of the approaching decision. In 2 hours he'd have to choose between the safe path and the unknown, between the life he'd built and the life he'd always wanted. This time, he had to choose right. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing their descent into JFK Airport. Around them, passengers stirred from sleep, gathering belongings and preparing for the return to reality. But Elliot felt suspended in time, watching the sunrise paint the cabin in shades of gold and amber. Naira moved with practiced efficiency, gently waking the twins and helping them gather their scattered toys and blankets. The girls were cranky from the disrupted sleep, rubbing their eyes and whimpering softly as their mother coaxed them back to consciousness. "Are we home?" Raya asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Almost, baby. Just a little longer." Elliot watched the tender interaction with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. This was his life, the bedtime stories, the gentle wake-to-up calls, the 1,000 small moments that built the foundation of family. All of it had been happening without him, 30 miles from his Manhattan office, in a world he'd never even known existed. "Sir?" The flight attendant appeared beside him with a warm smile. "We'll be landing in about 20 minutes. Can I get you anything before we begin our final descent?" "No, thank you." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, hoarse from the night's revelations. She moved on to check on other passengers, but Elliot's attention remained fixed on the family across the aisle. Naira was braiding Rena's hair with quick, skilled fingers while simultaneously helping Raya find her missing shoe. The multitasking was impressive, but he could see the exhaustion in her movements, the way she kept checking her watch like she was calculating how much time she had left. "Mama, I'm hungry," Rena announced. "We'll get breakfast as soon as we land," Naira promised, reaching into her carry-on for a small container of crackers. "Here, have a few of these." Elliot wanted to help, to do something useful, but he felt frozen by uncertainty. What was his role here? He was their father, but he was also a stranger. He had every right to care for them, but no experience in how to do it. The plane shuddered slightly as they hit turbulence, and Raya's eyes went wide with fear. Without thinking, Elliot reached across the aisle and touched her hand. "It's okay," he said gently. "The plane is just saying hello to the clouds." The explanation was silly, but it made her smile. "Really? Really? See? We're through the bumpy part already." She squeezed his fingers and the simple gesture sent warmth flooding through his chest. This was what he'd been missing, not just the major milestones but the small moments of comfort and connection. "You're good with them," Naira said quietly, surprise evident in her voice. "They make it easy. Not all men would feel that way." The comment hung between them, heavy with implication. She was testing him, maybe, or simply stating a fact based on her experience. Either way, it reminded him that he'd have to prove himself worthy of their trust. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime, and passengers began preparing for landing. Elliot watched Naira help the twins with their buckles, her movements sure and competent. She'd been doing this alone for 3 years, managing everything from bedtime routines to air travel with the kind of quiet competence that came from necessity. "Are you nervous?" Raya asked, looking at him with those perceptive eyes. "A little," he admitted. "Are you?" "No. Mama says there's nothing to be scared of when you're with the people you love." The innocent statement hit him like a physical blow. These children barely knew him, but they were already including him in their circle of love. Meanwhile, he was terrified of disappointing them, of proving himself as unreliable as his own father had been. "That's very wise," he said. "Mama's the wisest person in the world," Rena chimed in with the fierce loyalty of a 3-year-old. "She is," Elliot agreed, catching Naira's eye. "She's also the strongest." Color rose in her cheeks at the compliment, but she didn't look away. For a moment the walls between them lowered, and he saw the woman who'd once trusted him with her heart. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and passengers began to stir. But Elliot felt no relief at reaching their destination. If anything, the landing filled him with dread. In a few minutes, they'd disembark, and then what? Would this be goodbye? Would he watch them disappear into the crowd, taking his heart with them? "Mama, is he coming with us?" Raya's question cut through his spiraling thoughts. Naira's hands stilled on her seatbelt. "I don't know, sweetheart. I want him to come." "Me too," Rena added. "He smells like home." The simple declaration nearly brought Elliot to his knees. These children, who'd never known him, were already claiming him as family. but their mother watched him with guarded eyes, protecting herself and them from the possibility of disappointment. "That's up to him," Naira said carefully. "And it's more complicated than just wanting something." "Why is it complicated?" Raya asked with the directness of youth. "Because grown-ups have responsibilities, jobs and homes and lives that don't always fit together easily." Elliot heard the message beneath her words. He had a choice to make. He could return to his safe, predictable life, or he could step into the unknown and risk everything for the chance at something real. The plane pulled up to the gate, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Elliot reached for his laptop bag, but his movements felt mechanical, automatic. All his attention was focused on the family across the aisle, on the moment that would determine the rest of his life. "We should go," Naira said, standing and shouldering her carry-on. "The girls need breakfast, and we have a long subway ride ahead of us." Subway? The word hit him like a slap. While he'd been riding in first-class comfort, she'd been navigating public transportation with 2 toddlers and whatever luggage she could carry. The contrast between their lives was stark, humbling. "I could give you a ride," he offered. "We're fine. I know you're fine. But I'd like to help." She studied his face, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or proof that his offer came from genuine concern rather than guilt. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're carrying too much, because the girls are tired, because I want to spend more time with them. And after that? After you drop us off at our apartment and see how the other half lives?" The bitterness in her voice was well-earned. He'd built his fortune while she'd struggled to make ends meet. He'd been living in luxury while she'd been counting pennies and working multiple jobs to support their children. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm making this up as I go. That's not good enough. It's all I have." The honesty seemed to surprise her. The boarding tunnel was filling with passengers, but they remained seated, locked in a stalemate that would determine everything. "Mama, can we go now?" Rena asked, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "I really need to use the bathroom." The mundane request broke the spell. Naira gathered the twins' belongings and prepared to disembark, her movements brisk and efficient. But as she reached the aisle, she turned back to him. "Don't follow unless you mean to stay," she said quietly. The words were a warning and a challenge rolled into one. She was giving him an out, a chance to walk away before anyone got hurt. But she was also setting terms. If he chose to be part of their lives, it had to be real. No half measures, no convenient visits when his schedule allowed. "I do," he said, the words coming from someplace deeper than conscious thought. "Mean to stay." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Hope battling fear, love wrestling with self-preservation. Finally, she nodded, not quite acceptance, but not rejection either. "Raya, Rena, stay close to Mama," she said, taking each girl's hand. They moved slowly up the aisle, Elliot following behind like a shadow. He could smell her perfume, could see the way she held her shoulders rigid with tension. She was scared, he realized, scared of trusting him, scared of disappointing the girls, scared of opening her heart again only to have it shattered. He wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort and reassurance. But what promises could he make? That he'd never hurt them again? That he'd magically transform into the father and partner they deserved? That love would be enough to bridge the gap between their worlds? The terminal was bustling with early morning travelers, all moving with purpose toward their destinations. Elliot had navigated this chaos hundreds of times, but today it felt different. Today he wasn't just another businessman catching a flight. Today he was a father, walking beside his daughters for the first time in their lives. "The bathroom is this way," Naira said, steering the girls toward the restrooms. "I'll wait here," Elliot said, taking up position beside a bank of chairs. But as they walked away, Raya broke free from her mother's grip and ran back to him. She wrapped her small arms around his legs, hugging him with the fierce intensity of a child who'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Don't leave," she whispered against his pants leg. The plea shattered something inside his chest. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, and cupped her face in his hands. "I won't," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "I promise." She smiled then, gap-toothed and radiant, and skipped back to her mother. But Naira had witnessed the exchange, and the look she gave him was complicated, part gratitude, part fear, part something that might have been hope. "5 minutes," she said, disappearing into the restroom with both girls. Elliot stood alone in the bustling terminal, surrounded by strangers but feeling less alone than he had in years. His phone buzzed with missed calls and urgent emails, but for the first time in his adult life, work felt secondary to something more important. He was a father. He was part of a family. And despite all the uncertainty, despite the fear and the guilt and the overwhelming complexity of the situation, one thing was crystal clear. He was exactly where he belonged. The 42nd floor of the Vontech building offered a commanding view of Manhattan's skyline, but Elliot saw none of it. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee growing cold in his hand, staring at the city that had always felt like his kingdom. Today, it felt like a prison. 3 days had passed since the flight. 3 days since he'd driven Naira and the twins to their Bronx apartment, memorizing every detail of their neighborhood. The bodega on the corner, the code playground across the street, the way Raya had waved goodbye from their third-floor window. 3 days since he'd promised to call, and 3 days since he'd been too terrified to pick up the phone. "Sir," his assistant's voice cut through his thoughts. "The Tokyo team is waiting for your call." Elliot didn't turn from the window. "Reschedule it." "Sir, this is the 3rd time we've rescheduled. The acquisition deadline." "I said reschedule it." The silence behind him was deafening. In 10 years of working together, he'd never postponed a deal, never let personal matters interfere with business. But nothing about this felt personal anymore. It felt essential. "Of course, sir. Is there anything else you need?" "No, thank you, Margaret." He heard her retreating footsteps, the soft click of his office door closing. Alone again, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to the contact he'd added, but never called. Naira Chen. Just seeing her name made his chest tighten. What was he supposed to say? How did you call the woman whose life you'd destroyed and ask for a second chance? How did you explain that the kiss in the airplane galley had rewired something fundamental in your brain? His phone buzzed with a text from his head of security. Background check on Naira Chen complete. Sending report now. Elliot stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the attachment. He'd ordered the investigation on impulse, telling himself he needed to understand her situation better. But looking at it now, he felt sick. She'd already accused him of trying to control everything. Running a background check on her would only prove her point. He deleted the message without opening it. 15 miles away, Naira sat cross-legged on her living room floor, laptop balanced on her knees while the twins played with blocks nearby. The apartment was small but clean, filled with the kind of creative storage solutions that came from necessity. Books stacked in milk crates, toys organized in repurposed shoeboxes, a folding table that served as both desk and dining surface. "Mama, I'm hungry," Rena announced, abandoning her block tower. 5 more minutes, baby. I just need to finish this code." But the words on her screen blurred together, meaningless strings of text that refused to resolve into anything functional. She'd been staring at the same problem for 2 hours, her mind replaying moments from the flight, instead of focusing on the freelance project that would pay next month's rent. The way Elliot had looked at her in the galley, the desperation in his voice when he'd said he loved her, the careful way he'd knelt down to speak to Raya, like he was afraid of breaking something precious. "Mama." Raya appeared beside her, small hand touching her cheek. "Why are you crying?" Naira reached up and felt the wetness on her face. She'd been crying without realizing it, tears falling onto her keyboard while she pretended to work. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just tired." "Are you sad about the man from the airplane?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She'd underestimated how much the twins had absorbed, how carefully they'd been watching the adult drama unfold around them. "A little," she admitted. "But that's okay. Sometimes grown-ups feel sad about things. Is he going to come see us?" "I don't know. I hope he does. I liked him." Raya curled up against her mother's side, and Naira felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. These children needed stability, not the emotional chaos that came with their father's sudden reappearance. They needed a mother who could focus on their needs, not one who was distracted by impossible dreams. But late at night, when the girls were asleep and the apartment was quiet, she allowed herself to remember the way Elliot's hands had felt in her hair, the broken sound he'd made when she told him about the pregnancy, the way he'd looked at their daughters like they were miracles he'd been waiting his whole life to witness. The gifts started arriving on Thursday. Elliot had spent the morning in meetings, pretending to care about quarterly projections while his mind wandered to a cramped apartment in the Bronx. During lunch, he'd escaped to FAO Schwartz, telling himself he was just browsing. But somehow he'd ended up at the checkout counter with armloads of educational toys, books, and art supplies. He'd had them delivered anonymously, along with a note, for two brilliant girls. A friend. The rejection came back the same day. A package appeared on his assistant's desk with a handwritten note taped to the outside. "You can't buy your way in. N." The words hit him like a slap, but they were fair. He'd been trying to solve an emotional problem with money, falling back on the same tactics that had driven her away 4 years ago. But what was the alternative? How did you repair a relationship when the other person wouldn't even take your calls? Naira stared at the returned package on her kitchen counter, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. Part of her had wanted to keep the gifts. They were beautiful, thoughtful, exactly the kind of educational toys she couldn't afford. Raya would have loved a microscope, and Rena would have spent hours with the art supplies, but accepting them would have been the first step down a dangerous path. She'd learned the hard way that Elliot's generosity came with strings attached, that his love was conditional on her fitting into his world rather than him joining hers. "Mama, what's in the box?" Raya asked, standing on her tiptoes to see. "Just some things that need to go back to the store. Are they for us?" The hope in her daughter's voice was devastating. Sometimes people send things by mistake. Oh, Raya's disappointment was palpable. "I thought maybe they were from the airplane man." "Why would you think that?" "Because he looked at us like Daddy looks at us in my dreams." The comment stopped Naira cold. She knelt down to her daughter's level, studying the small face that was so much like Elliot's. "What do you dream about, baby?" "About a daddy who reads us stories and makes pancakes and fixes our broken toys. He has your eyes and his face." The innocent confession shattered something in Naira's chest. She tried so hard to protect the girls from the pain of their father's absence, but children were more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. They'd been creating their own narrative, filling the gaps with hope and imagination. "Do you think he's our daddy?" Raya asked. I think he wants to be." "Then why isn't he here?" The question had no easy answer. "Because he's scared. Because I'm scared. Because love isn't always enough to bridge the gap between two different worlds. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out," she said instead. "How much time?" "I don't know, sweetheart." The second package arrived on Saturday. This time, it was practical items. New shoes for both girls, winter coats, school supplies. The note read, "I'm not trying to buy anything. I just want to help. E." Naira sat on her fire escape, staring at the gifts spread across her living room floor. The shoes were the right size. The coats were exactly what she'd been planning to buy when she could afford them. He'd somehow known exactly what they needed. The attention to detail was what undid her. He'd been paying attention during their brief time together, noting the girls' worn sneakers, the way they'd shivered slightly in the airport's air conditioning. He'd seen their needs and tried to meet them, but she couldn't accept charity from the man who'd abandoned them in the first place. It felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that she couldn't provide for her children without his help. She boxed everything up again, but this time she included a longer note. "We don't need your money. We need your presence. There's a difference." And the third package never made it to the delivery truck. Elliot sat in his penthouse that evening, surrounded by the toys and clothes he'd bought for daughters who didn't want them. The rejection stung, but it also impressed him. Naira had always been proud, fiercely independent, unwilling to accept help that came with conditions. It was one of the things he'd loved about her from the beginning. But how did you help someone who wouldn't let you? How did you prove you'd changed when every gesture was interpreted as manipulation? His phone rang, and for a moment, his heart stopped. But it was only his mother's sister calling from Portland with updates about family he rarely saw. "You sound tired, sweetheart," Aunt Linda said. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm fine. You know, your mother always said you'd make a wonderful father someday. You have her heart, even if you hide it better." The comment hit him like a physical blow. His mother had died believing he'd someday find happiness, someday build the family she'd never been able to complete. If she could see him now, alone in his tower, estranged from his own children, what would she think? "I might have children," he said before he could stop himself. "Might have. It's complicated. The best things usually are." After she hung up, Elliot stood at his window again, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in the Bronx, his daughters were probably getting ready for bed, listening to their mother read stories in voices he'd never heard. They were growing up without him, building memories he'd never share, learning to navigate the world without his guidance or protection. The thought was unbearable. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. "I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to be better. Can we talk?" He stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. His phone immediately buzzed with a response. Talk isn't enough anymore. Show me. 3 words. A challenge and an invitation rolled into one. Show me. He could work with that. The Morningside Park Code playground was busier than Elliot had expected. Children's laughter mixed with the sounds of traffic, creating a symphony of urban family life he'd never experienced. He sat on a bench 30 feet from the swings, nursing a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the entrance for any sign of them. He'd been coming here for 3 days. Margaret thought he'd lost his mind. The Tokyo acquisition was hemorrhaging money. The board was asking questions about his sudden absence from meetings, and his stock options were taking a beating. But none of that mattered as much as the possibility of seeing his daughters again. The private investigator's report had mentioned this code playground. Naira brought the twins here every Tuesday and Thursday morning, usually around 10:30. It was public information, gleaned from social media posts and neighborhood observations. Nothing invasive, he'd told himself, just research. But sitting here now, he felt like a stalker. "Mama, push me higher." The voice made his blood freeze. Raya's voice carried on the autumn wind like a gift. He looked up to see them walking through the code playground gate, Naira in jeans and a worn sweater, the twins in matching purple jackets that looked handmade. They were beautiful, all 3 of them, moving through the world with the easy confidence of people who belong to each other. Naira helped Rena onto the monkey bars while Raya ran straight for the swings, her laughter bright and infectious. For 20 minutes, he simply watched Naira tie a shoe, push the girls on swings, mediate a dispute over sandbox territory. She was a natural mother, patient and attentive, completely present in a way that made his chest ache with longing. He should leave. This was wrong, invasive, exactly the kind of controlling behavior that had driven her away before. But he couldn't make himself stand up, couldn't tear his eyes away from the life he'd chosen to abandon. "Mama, look." Raya pointed toward the climbing structure. "I can go all the way to the top." "Be careful, baby. Hold on tight." But Naira's voice carried a note of distraction. She kept glancing around the code playground, her shoulders tense with an awareness that made Elliot's stomach clench. She knew someone was watching her. Their eyes met across the code playground, and the world stopped. Naira's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, hurt, and something that might have been relief. She said something to the twins, who immediately looked in his direction. Raya waved enthusiastically, but Rena hung back, sensing the tension in her mother's posture. Elliot stood slowly, his coffee cup forgotten on the bench. The walk across the code playground felt like crossing a minefield, every step taking him closer to a confrontation he'd been both dreading and craving. "What are you doing here?" Naira's voice was carefully controlled, but he could hear the fury underneath. "I wanted to see them." "So, you decided to stalk us?" "I wasn't stalking. I was just sitting on a bench watching my children without my permission. What would you call that?" The accusation hit home because it was fair. He had been watching them, learning their routines, inserting himself into their lives without invitation. "I called you," he said weakly. "Once. You called once, and when I didn't answer immediately, you decided to hunt us down instead. I didn't know how else to reach you. You could have tried harder. You could have left a message. You could have shown up at my door like a normal person instead of lurking in code playgrounds like a what? Like someone who can't be trusted around children." The words hit him like a physical blow. He saw the exact moment she realized what she'd said, saw the flash of regret in her eyes. But it was too late. The damage was done. "I would never hurt them," he said quietly. "I know that." Her voice was softer now, but the anger was still there. "But you're hurting them anyway. Raya asks about you every day. She wants to know when you're coming back, when she can see you again. And I don't know what to tell her because I don't know what you want." "I want to be their father." "Being their father isn't something you can want, Elliot. It's something you have to do. Every day, for the rest of your life, whether it's convenient or not." The twins had wandered closer, drawn by the tension in their mother's voice. Raya slipped her hand into Elliot's, while Rena stayed close to Naira's side. "Are you fighting?" Raya asked with the directness of a child. "We're having a discussion," Naira said carefully. "It sounds like fighting. Sometimes adults need to have difficult conversations." "About what?" Naira looked at Elliot, and he saw the weight of responsibility in her eyes. These children needed stability, not the emotional chaos that came with their father's sudden reappearance. "About where we all fit in each other's lives," he said finally. "I want you to fit in ours," Raya said simply. "Don't you want to fit?" The innocent question broke something open in his chest. Of course he wanted to fit. He wanted to belong to them, to be part of their daily routine, to earn the right to their love and trust. "I do," he said. "But it's complicated. Why is everything always complicated with grown-ups?" Rena asked, speaking for the first time. "Because grown-ups are scared," Naira said softly, her eyes still on Elliot. "They're scared of making mistakes, of hurting people they care about, of taking risks that might not work out. Are you scared of him?" Raya asked. The question hung in the air between them. Naira's throat worked as she swallowed, and Elliot held his breath waiting for her answer. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm scared of him." "Why?" "Because he has the power to hurt us, and I don't know if I can trust him not to." The honesty was devastating. She was laying their entire dynamic bare in front of their children, with the kind of courage that had first attracted him to her. "I won't hurt you," he said. "You already have." "I know. But I won't do it again." "How can you promise that?" "Because I can't live without you. Without any of you." The admission slipped out before he could stop it, raw and desperate. Naira's breath caught, and he saw the exact moment her carefully constructed walls began to crumble. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say things like that here. Where else am I supposed to say them? Nowhere. You're not supposed to say them at all." But even as she spoke, he could see the longing in her eyes, the way she was fighting against the pull between them. The same pull that had brought them together in Miami, that had made her trust him with her body and her heart. "Mama, why are you crying?" Rena asked, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "I'm not crying." "Yes, you are." And she was. Tears tracked down her cheeks, silent and devastating, as she looked at the man who'd broken her heart and was asking for the chance to do it again. "I can't do this," she said, backing away. "Girls, we need to go." "But we just got here," Rhea protested. "I know, baby, but we need to leave." "Because of him?" "Because Mama needs some time to think." But as she turned to gather their things, the sky opened up. Rain began to fall in fat, heavy drops that quickly soaked through their clothes. Parents scrambled for cover, children shrieked with delight or dismay, and the code playground emptied in seconds. "This way," Elliot called, pointing toward a covered pavilion near the park's edge. They ran together, the twins laughing despite the chaos, Naira's hand briefly brushing his as they herded the children toward shelter. The pavilion was small, intimate, designed for summer picnics rather than autumn downpours. They pressed together under the roof, breathing hard, their clothes clinging to their bodies. "I hate this," Naira said suddenly. "The rain, you, this. The way you make me feel like I'm 16 again. Is that so terrible? When you're a single mother with 2 kids and bills to pay? Yes, it's terrible." The twins had found a bench and were comparing raindrops on their jackets, momentarily distracted from the adult drama. Elliot moved closer to Naira, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. "I think about that weekend every day," he said quietly. "Don't. I think about the way you laughed when I told you about my disastrous attempt at cooking, the way you looked in my shirt the next morning, the way you made me believe I could be better than I was." "Stop." "I think about the life we could have had, the family we could have built together. We did build a family." Her voice was fierce now, protective. "I built a family. Without you. I know. And you did an incredible job. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for me now. There's always been room for you. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it." The challenge in her voice made his blood sing. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, brilliant, fearless, unafraid to demand what she was worth. "I'm here," he said. "You're here now. But what about tomorrow? What about next week when the novelty wears off and you remember how much easier your life was without us?" "It was never easier without you. It was more convenient." "Convenient isn't the same as easy." The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the pavilion roof with increasing intensity. They were trapped here together, forced to confront the feelings they'd been dancing around for days. "I hate that I still want you," she said suddenly. "I hate that I let you go. You didn't let me go. You pushed me away. I know. You chose your career over us. I chose wrong. How do I know you won't choose wrong again?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. But Elliot was already moving, drawn by the pain in her voice, the way she was fighting against the pull between them. "Because I can't survive losing you twice," he said, reaching for her. "Don't." But even as she said it, she was leaning into him, her body betraying her words. "I love you," he said, his hands framing her face. I've loved you for 4 years, even when I was too stupid to fight for you. Love isn't enough. Then, what is? I don't know. The admission broke something open between them. She was crying now, really crying. 4 years of pain and longing finally spilling over. He pulled her against him, and she came willingly, her fists clenching in his shirt. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. I know. I can't go through that again. You won't have to. You don't know that. No, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving it. She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for something, truth perhaps, or the man she'd once believed he could become. This is crazy, she said. Good crazy or bad crazy? I don't know yet. But she didn't pull away when he lowered his head, didn't resist when his lips found hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, 4 years of separation compressed into a single point of contact. She tasted like tears and rain and the same promise he'd been too frightened to accept in Miami. The girls, she gasped against his mouth, are watching the rain. Someone could see us. I don't care. And he didn't. Let the world see him claiming the woman he should have fought for years ago. Let them see him finally choosing love over convenience, passion over predictability. She pulled him deeper into the shadows of the pavilion, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his with desperate need. This wasn't the tender reunion he'd imagined. This was raw, aggressive, soaked in years of pain and longing. I hate you, she breathed against his throat. I know. I hate that you left. I know. I hate that I still need you. I need you too. The rain pounded against the roof above them, drowning out everything except the sound of their harsh breathing, the whispered confessions they'd been too proud to speak. 4 years of silence, broken by the storm that had driven them into each other's arms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, clothes disheveled, lips swollen from kisses that tasted like desperation and hope. This changes everything, she said. Good. I'm not the same person I was 4 years ago. Neither am I. The girls come first. Always. I know. If you hurt them, I won't. If you hurt me, I won't. She searched his face one more time, and he saw the exact moment she made her decision. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. One chance, she said. One chance. The rain was already beginning to lighten, but neither of them moved to leave their shelter. They stood there in the shadows, holding each other, preparing for whatever came next. 4 years earlier, the clinic's waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Naira sat in a plastic chair, her hands folded over her still flat stomach, watching other women navigate their own impossible choices. Some looked relieved, others devastated. All of them looked alone. She'd been staring at the same pamphlet for 20 minutes, the words blurring together until they became meaningless. Your options, a guide to reproductive health. Such clinical language for something that felt like her heart being torn in half. 2 pink lines. That's all it had taken to shatter the carefully constructed life she'd built after Miami. 2 pink lines and the memory of Elliot's voice saying, I have to get back to what matters. Naira Chen? A nurse with kind eyes appeared in the doorway. This was it. The moment that would determine everything that came after. She could walk through that door and emerge 30 minutes later with her future intact, her dreams achievable, her heart protected from further damage. Or she could walk away. I need a moment, she whispered. The nurse nodded with the patience of someone who'd seen this hesitation hundreds of times. Take all the time you need, honey. We'll be here when you're ready. But would she ever be ready? Ready to make a choice this enormous, this permanent, this lonely? She thought about Elliot's hands on her skin, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, the way he'd looked at her during their weekend together, like she was the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his entire life. Then she remembered his face that last morning, the careful distance in his voice when his phone rang with news of the Tokyo deal, the way he'd said complicated like their connection was a problem to be managed rather than a gift to be treasured. Her phone buzzed. For a wild moment, hope flared in her chest. Maybe it was him. Maybe he'd realized what he was throwing away. Maybe it was her student loan company. Payment overdue. The irony was devastating. She was sitting in a clinic contemplating ending a pregnancy because she couldn't afford to raise a child, while the man who'd helped create this life was probably closing million-dollar deals in boardrooms she'd never see. Miss Chen? The nurse was back, her expression gentle but professional. We do need to move forward with your appointment. Naira closed her eyes, feeling tears track down her cheeks. She thought about her mother, who'd raised 3 children alone after her father left, about the nights she'd gone to bed hungry so her kids could eat, about the way she'd worked 2 jobs and still found time to help with homework, to kiss scraped knees, to make Christmas magical on a budget of hope and determination. "I can't," she said finally. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The relief that flooded through her was immediate and overwhelming. She stumbled from the clinic into the harsh afternoon sunlight, her hand pressed protectively over her stomach. She was going to be a mother. Alone, broke, and terrified, but a mother nonetheless. The next 8 months were a blur of struggle and small victories. She moved to a cheaper apartment, picked up extra freelance work, and learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. She slept in her car between coding jobs when rent was due and food was scarce. She haunted library computers when hers broke down, typing proposals with swollen fingers and an aching back, but she never regretted her choice. Even during the darkest moments, eating ramen for the 5th night in a row, crying through morning sickness in public restrooms, lying awake wondering how she'd afford diapers, she never regretted choosing them. The night she went into labor, she drove herself to the hospital. 22 hours later, she held 2 perfect daughters and understood for the first time what unconditional love actually meant. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Elliot stood in his mother's empty house, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of better times. She'd been gone for 6 months, but he still expected to hear her voice calling from the kitchen, still reached for the phone to share good news with someone who was no longer there to receive it. The cancer had taken her quickly, aggressively, stealing away the only person who'd ever loved him without conditions. She'd died believing he'd find happiness someday, believing he'd build the family she'd never been able to complete after his father left. If she could see him now, successful, wealthy, and utterly hollow, what would she think? "Mr. Vaughn?" The estate attorney's voice cut through his thoughts. "We need to go through her personal effects." He nodded numbly, following the man upstairs to his mother's bedroom. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The book on her nightstand still bookmarked on page 247, her reading glasses folded neatly beside the lamp, a framed photo of them from his college graduation smiling from the dresser. In her jewelry box, beneath the pearls his father had given her before he'd decided commitment was too complicated, Elliot found a letter with his name on it. His mother's careful handwriting, slightly shaky from the medication but still unmistakably hers. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, then I've finally gotten to see your father again, and you're left with more questions than answers. I wish I could have given you more time, but cancer doesn't negotiate. I need you to know how proud I am of everything you've built. You've achieved more in 30 years than most people manage in a lifetime. But success isn't the same as happiness, and I worry you don't know the difference. Your father left because he was afraid of failure. Don't let fear of the same thing keep you from trying. Love is the only risk worth taking, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Find someone who challenges you, who makes you want to be better than you are. And when you find her, don't let her go. All my love, Mom. P.S. I kept your father's ring, not because I forgave him, but because someday you might need it for the right reasons." At the bottom of the jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper, was his father's wedding band. The same ring his mother had thrown at the door when he'd left them for a business opportunity that turned out to be another woman. Elliot held the ring up to the light, remembering the way his father had twisted it nervously during their last conversation. How he'd promised to come back. How he'd made commitments he'd never intended to keep. Was that what he'd done to Naira? Made promises with his body that his words had failed to honor? The memory of their last morning together hit him like a physical blow. The way she'd looked when his phone rang, the hope dying in her eyes as he'd chosen business over her. The careful way she'd dressed, gathering her things while he'd taken his call, preparing to leave his life as quietly as she'd entered it. He'd let her go. Worse, he'd pushed her away. For months after Miami, he'd thrown himself into work with manic intensity. The Tokyo acquisition, the European expansion, the endless stream of deals that had made him richer and emptier with each success. He told himself he was building something important, something that would last. But what was the point of building an empire if you had no one to share it with? He'd hired investigators to find her, but their searches had turned up nothing. It was as if she'd vanished from the earth, taking with her the only genuine connection he'd ever felt to another human being. Late at night, alone in his penthouse, he'd replay their weekend over and over. The way she'd argued with his development team about ethics and artificial intelligence. How she'd beaten him at chess 3 times running, laughing at his increasingly frustrated expressions. The way she'd felt in his arms, like she was made to fit against him. He'd had relationships since then, beautiful women, successful women, Women who understood his world and made no emotional demands. But none of them made him feel the way Naira had. None of them challenged him, changed him, made him want to be worthy of their love. His mother's funeral had been well attended, filled with business associates and society friends who offered polite condolences and empty platitudes. But standing beside her grave, watching the casket disappear into the earth, all he could think about was how alone he was. No family, no real friends, no one who would mourn him when he was gone. That night, he'd called the investigators again. "Find her," he'd said. "I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. Find her." But Naira Chen had effectively disappeared, leaving only the memory of her laugh and the business card he'd carried in his wallet like a talisman. He'd kept working, kept building, kept telling himself that someday she'd resurface, that someday he'd have the chance to explain, to apologize, to fight for what they'd had. He'd just never imagined it would be on a red-eye flight with two little girls who had his eyes and her smile. Present day. The pavilion had grown quiet, except for the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Naira stood pressed against Elliot's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. 4 years of separation, of parallel lives lived in different worlds, had led them back to this moment. "I used to wonder what you were doing," she said softly, "especially during the hard times. I'd see your company in the news and wonder if you ever thought about me." "Every day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought about you every single day. But you never came looking. I tried. I hired investigators, searched social media, attended every tech conference hoping to catch a glimpse of you. You'd disappeared. I changed my name back to Chen, started using my middle name for work. I didn't want to be found." "Why?" She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because I was 24 and pregnant, and terrified that if you found me, you'd try to convince me to give them up, that you'd see them as mistakes to be corrected rather than miracles to be cherished." The admission hit him like a physical blow. She'd been protecting their children from him, from the possibility that he'd see them as problems to be solved rather than gifts to be treasured. "I would never. I know that now. But then I only knew the man who'd chosen a business deal over what we'd built together." The rain was slowing, the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. Soon they'd have to leave this shelter, return to the world where choices had consequences and love wasn't always enough. But for now, they stood together in the shadows, finally understanding the weight of the years between them, the struggles and the loneliness, the dreams deferred, and the love that had never really died. "We can't change the past," she said. "No. But maybe we can build something better from what's left." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the exact moment she made her choice. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. "The girls need their father," she said finally. "And what do you need?" "I need to believe you've changed. I need to know you won't run when things get difficult." "I won't run. Promise me." "I promise." The words were a vow, a commitment, a bridge across 4 years of separation. Outside, the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. They had work to do, trust to rebuild, hearts to heal, a family to become. But standing there in the aftermath of the storm, Elliot finally understood what his mother had been trying to tell him. Love was the only risk worth taking, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. The text message arrived on Wednesday evening while Naira was helping the twins with their bath. "Would you like to come for dinner Friday? Nothing fancy, just us. My address is attached. E." She stared at the phone for a full minute, suds dripping from her hands onto the screen. After their encounter in the pavilion 3 days ago, she'd expected grand gestures, expensive restaurants, elaborate plans designed to impress rather than connect. Instead, he was offering something simple, personal. "Mama, you're making that face again," Raya observed from the bathtub. "What face?" "The face you make when you're thinking about the airplane man. His name is Elliot," Naira said automatically. "Are we going to see Elliot?" Rena asked, perking up from behind a mountain of bubbles. The hope in her daughter's voice was both heartwarming and terrifying. The girls had been asking about him constantly since the Code playground, their 3-year-old minds unable to understand why someone who claimed to be their father kept disappearing from their lives. "Maybe," Naira said carefully. "He invited us for dinner." "At his house?" "Yes." "Does he have toys?" "I don't know, sweetheart." But as she tucked them into bed that night, she found herself wondering the same thing. What was Elliot's home like? She'd imagined a sterile penthouse, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that no one was allowed to touch. The kind of place where C.H. Ildren would feel like intruders rather than welcome guests. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. Friday at 6 works. What can we bring? His reply came immediately. Just yourselves. The address led them to a tree-lined street in Brooklyn Heights, far from the Manhattan towers she'd expected. The brownstone was beautiful but understated, with a small front garden and window boxes that looked recently planted. Not the home of a man who valued possessions over people. It's pretty, Raya announced as they climbed the front steps. Very pretty, Rena agreed, studying the carved details around the door. Before Naira could knock, the door opened to reveal Elliot in jeans and a navy sweater, his hair slightly mussed and his sleeves rolled up. She'd never seen him look so approachable. Gone was the polished businessman from the airplane, replaced by someone who looked like he actually lived in this house rather than just staying in it. You found it, he said, and she could hear relief in his voice. GPS is a wonderful thing. Come in. I hope you don't mind, but I thought we'd eat outside. The weather's supposed to be nice. He led them through a house that surprised her at every turn. Instead of the minimalist showcase she'd expected, she found warm colors, comfortable furniture, and family photos scattered throughout. Pictures of a woman who had to be his mother, images of him at various ages, bookshelves filled with actual books rather than design objects. You live here? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. For about 2 years now. I got tired of the penthouse. Too much glass, not enough life. The backyard was even more surprising. A wooden deck overlooked a small garden, complete with a gas grill, outdoor furniture, and what looked like the beginnings of a vegetable patch. Strings of lights had been hung between the trees, and a small table was set for 4 with mismatched plates that looked like they'd actually been used before. I may have gone a little overboard, Elliot said, following her gaze. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a bit of everything. The spread was impressive but not overwhelming. Burgers and hot dogs for the girls, salmon and vegetarian options for the adults, a salad that looked homemade rather than catered. It was the kind of meal a family might share, casual and welcoming rather than designed to impress. Can we explore? Raya asked, already eyeing the garden. Of course. Just stay where we can see you. The twins took off like shots, examining every flower and chasing the butterflies that had gathered around the newly planted marigolds. Naira watched them go, marveling at how quickly they'd made themselves at home. They're not shy, Elliot observed. Never have been. I think they get that from me. And the stubborn streak? Definitely from you. He laughed, and the sound was lighter than she remembered. Less guarded, more genuine. This was the man she'd fallen in love with in Miami. The one who'd emerged when his professional mask slipped, who'd been vulnerable and real and impossibly charming. Can I get you something to drink? Wine, beer, sparkling water? Water's fine. I'm driving. Right. Of course. She settled into one of the deck chairs while he disappeared into the house, taking the opportunity to study her surroundings more carefully. The garden was clearly new, but someone had put thought into it. Child-friendly plants, no toxic flowers, a small sandbox tucked into one corner like he'd been planning for visitors exactly this size. You've been busy, she said when he returned with their drinks. I may have done some research on what makes a good space for children. Research? Books, mostly. Some very judgmental parenting blogs. Did you know there are 17 different schools of thought on appropriate sandbox sand? The confession made her smile despite herself. She could easily envision him approaching fatherhood like any other challenge, armed with data and determination to excel. And which school did you choose? The one that promised the least likelihood of tracking into the house. Practical. I'm learning that practical matters more than perfect when it comes to kids. The insight was surprisingly mature, especially coming from a man who'd built his career on controlling every variable. She watched him check the grill temperature, adjust the umbrella angle, fidget with things that didn't need adjusting. You're nervous, she observed. Terrified, he admitted. I've closed billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than I'm feeling about grilling hot dogs correctly. Hot dogs are pretty forgiving, are they? Because I've been watching YouTube videos for 3 days, and apparently there are strong opinions about proper grill marks. Despite everything, the years of anger, the hurt, the careful walls she'd built around her heart, Naira found herself laughing. Really laughing, for the first time since she'd seen him on that airplane. There, he said, looking pleased. That's the sound I was hoping for. What sound? You laughing. I missed it. The moment grew heavier, weighted with the memory of easier times. But before it could become uncomfortable, Raya came running back to the deck. "There are tomatoes growing," she announced. "Real tomatoes. I planted them last month," Elliot said, kneeling down to her level. "They should be ready to eat in a few weeks. Can we help pick them? If your mom says it's okay." The automatic deference to her authority was unexpected and appreciated. He wasn't trying to be the fun parent who overruled her decisions. He was acknowledging that she was the primary caretaker, that her rules mattered. "We'll see," Naira said, which in mom speak meant probably yes. Rena appeared from behind the tool shed, her hands dirty and her face bright with excitement. "There's a butterfly house." "A what?" Naira looked to Elliot for explanation. "I may have gotten carried away at the garden center. It's supposed to attract butterflies and bees. Good for the environment. And fun to watch," Rena added pragmatically. That too. Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. The girls chattered about school and friends while Elliot listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention. He didn't try to impress them with expensive gifts or elaborate entertainment. Instead, he offered something far more valuable, his presence. "Mama, can we show Elliot our drawings?" Raya asked as she finished her burger. "If he wants to see them, I would love to see them," he said. The twins disappeared into the house. Somehow they'd already figured out the layout and returned with their backpacks. They spread their latest artwork across the deck table with the solemnity of curators arranging a gallery opening. "This is our family," Rena announced, pointing to a drawing of stick figures. "That's Mama. That's me. That's Raya." "And who's that?" Elliot asked, pointing to a fourth figure that had been added in different crayon. "That's our daddy. We don't know what he looks like, so we made him tall." The innocent explanation hit both adults like a physical blow. Naira felt tears prick her eyes while Elliot went very still, staring at the crude drawing like it contained the secrets of the universe. "He looks very nice," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "We think so too," Raya said matter-of-factly. "Mama says he's probably very busy, but that he loves us anyway." "I'm sure he does. Do you have kids?" Rena asked with the directness that only 3-year-olds could manage. Elliot glanced at Naira, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This was his choice to make, his truth to tell. "I think I might," he said carefully. "But I'm still figuring out how to be the kind of daddy they deserve." "It's not that hard," Raya assured him. "You just have to love them and keep them safe and read bedtime stories. And fix things when they break," Rena added. "And make pancakes on Sunday mornings," Raya continued. "That sounds like a very important job," Elliot said seriously. "The most important," Rena agreed. As the evening progressed, Naira found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. Elliot wasn't performing or trying to prove anything. He was simply present, engaged, genuinely interested in getting to know his daughters as people rather than obligations. When the girls asked to play hide and seek, he threw himself into the game with enthusiasm that seemed completely natural. When Rena skinned her knee on the deck stairs, he cleaned the wound with gentle competence and produced a Band-Aid decorated with unicorns. "You came prepared," Naira observed. The parenting blogs were very clear about the importance of good first aid supplies. "What else did the blogs tell you?" "That I'm going to make approximately 17,000 mistakes, but that love and consistency matter more than perfection." The wisdom in his words surprised her. This wasn't the man who'd needed to control every outcome, who'd seen their relationship as a variable to be managed. This was someone who'd learned to embrace uncertainty, to value connection over control. As the sun began to set, the strings of lights illuminated the garden in a warm, golden glow. The girls had tired themselves out and were curled up on an outdoor love seat, sharing a picture book while their parents cleaned up the remnants of dinner. "Thank you," Naira said as she helped him carry plates into the kitchen. "For what?" "For this. For being—" She struggled to find the right words. "For being real, as opposed to the person I thought you were. The person I was afraid you still were." He was quiet for a moment, loading dishes into the dishwasher with the careful attention of someone still learning domestic routines. "I've had a lot of time to think about who I want to be," he said finally, "about what matters and what doesn't. Turns out most of what I thought was important was just noise. And what actually matters." He looked through the window at the girls, still absorbed in their book, and then back at her. "This," he said simply. "Being here, being present, being worthy of their trust. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. For the first time since that airplane, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. "They like you," she said. "I like them too. They're extraordinary. They get that from their father." The compliment seemed to surprise him. He stopped loading dishes and turned to face her fully. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." For a moment they simply looked at each other across the kitchen, years of hurt and hope hanging between them. Then Raya's voice called from the deck. "Mama, Elliot, come see the fireflies." They went back outside to find the garden filled with tiny points of light, like stars that had decided to dance among the flowers. The girls were enchanted, chasing the blinking insects with gentle hands and squeals of delight. "Magic," Rena announced solemnly. "Pure magic," Elliot agreed, and Naira caught him looking at her rather than the fireflies. As they prepared to leave, the girls clung to him with the unconscious affection of children who'd been starved for paternal attention. He hugged them back with a tenderness that made Naira's heart ache. "Can we come back?" Raya asked. "If your mom says it's okay," he said, once again deferring to her authority. "We'll see," Naira said, which this time meant definitely yes. In the car driving home, she caught herself smiling. For the first time in 4 years, the future felt like a possibility rather than a burden. Maybe love really was worth the risk. 3 weeks after the dinner at Elliot's house, Naira found herself standing at his front door with an overnight bag in one hand and her heart in her throat. The girls had been asking to spend a weekend with him since that first evening, and she'd finally run out of reasonable excuses to say no. "You sure about this?" she asked for the third time as Raya and Rena bounded up the front steps. "Completely sure," Elliot said, though she caught the flash of nervous excitement in his eyes. "We've got this, right, girls?" "Right," they chorused, already pushing past him into the house they'd claimed as their second home. Over the past few weeks, he'd become a regular part of their routine. Tuesday evening dinners, Saturday afternoon adventures to museums and parks, bedtime stories read over video calls when work kept him late. He'd approached fatherhood with the same methodical intensity he brought to everything else, but tempered now with patience and genuine affection. The transformation had been remarkable to watch. The man who'd once needed to control every variable had learned to embrace the beautiful chaos of children. He'd mastered the art of negotiating with a 3-year-old, could braid hair with surprising competence, and had memorized the girl's complicated bedtime routine down to which stuffed animal went where. "Their pajamas are in the purple bag," Naira said, running through the mental checklist she'd rehearsed a dozen times. "Raya still needs her nightlight, and Rena sometimes has bad dreams about monsters under the bed," he finished gently. "I know, we've talked about it. And if they get homesick, I'll call you immediately. And their breakfast?" "Mama," Raya appeared in the doorway, exasperated. "We'll be fine. Elliot knows how to take care of us." The simple statement hit Naira like a revelation. Her daughters trusted him completely, had accepted him into their lives with the wholehearted enthusiasm that only children could manage. It was she who was still holding back, still protecting herself against the possibility of disappointment. "Go," Elliot said softly, understanding her hesitation. "Enjoy your weekend. When's the last time you had 36 hours to yourself?" The answer was never. She'd been the sole caretaker for 3 years, managing every crisis, handling every need, making every decision. The idea of stepping back, of trusting someone else with the most precious parts of her life, was both terrifying and intoxicating. "Call if you need anything," she said, kissing both girls goodbye. "We won't need anything," Rena said with the confidence of someone who'd already planned the entire weekend. "Elliot's going to teach us to make pancakes from scratch. And we're going to plant seeds in the garden," Raya added, "and build a fort in the living room." They finished together. Naira laughed despite her nerves. "It sounds like you have everything planned." "We do," Elliot said, meeting her eyes. "Go be free for a while. We've got this." The drive back to her empty apartment felt surreal. No car seats to adjust, no juice boxes to distribute, no endless chorus of "Are we there yet?" Just her, alone with her thoughts and the radio playing songs she'd forgotten she loved. Her apartment felt cavernous without the girls' laughter filling it. She wandered from room to room, picking up toys out of habit before remembering their owners were elsewhere. For the first time in years, she could take a bath without being interrupted, could eat dinner at a reasonable hour, could watch something on television that didn't involve animated animals. But instead of relief, she felt oddly disconnected. Her life had become so centered around her daughters that she'd forgotten who she was without them. The woman who'd once debated artificial intelligence ethics with brilliant minds, who'd had dreams beyond motherhood, who'd been interesting enough to capture Elliot Vaughn's attention. Her phone buzzed with a text. Pancakes were a disaster, but everyone's laughing. Sending photographic evidence. The attached picture showed her kitchen covered in flour, two beaming children wearing more batter than they'd apparently gotten in the bowl, and Elliot with a streak of pancake mix across his cheek looking happier than she'd ever seen him. She typed back, "Looks perfect to me." His response came immediately. "Want to come for dinner tomorrow, after we get them settled?" Just us. The invitation hung on her screen like a dare. Just us. When was the last time they'd been alone together without the girls as a buffer? Without the weight of logistics and parenting decisions filling every conversation? Okay, she typed before she could change her mind. The next evening, she returned to find the brownstone transformed. The girls were already in their pajamas, clean and fed, and glowing with the satisfaction of a day well spent. They showed her the fort they'd built, the seedlings they'd planted, the elaborate chalk drawings covering the back patio. "We had the best day ever," Raya announced, climbing into Naira's lap for a cuddle. "Tell me everything." But as the girls recounted their adventures, Naira found herself watching Elliot. The way he listened to their stories with genuine interest, how he remembered details from their previous conversations, the unconscious ease with which he'd stepped into the role of father. He'd grown into it naturally, like he'd been waiting his whole life for these two small people to make him complete. After the girls were tucked into bed, Elliot handling the routine with practiced efficiency, they found themselves alone in his kitchen. The house felt different without the children's energy, more intimate somehow. "They were perfect," he said, opening a bottle of wine. "No tantrums, no homesickness, no disasters except the pancake incident. I never doubted it." "Yes, you did." His smile was gentle, understanding. "You were terrified to leave them with me." "Not terrified of you," she clarified. "Terrified of letting go. I've been their everything for so long, I forgot how to trust anyone else with their care." "And now?" She accepted the wine he offered, considering her answer. "Now I'm starting to remember that they need more than just me. They need their father, too." The admission seemed to surprise them both. For weeks, they'd been dancing around the fundamental question of what he meant to their family. Tonight, she'd finally given him a title that carried weight, father. "I made dinner," he said, and she could hear the nervous energy in his voice. "Nothing fancy, just—" "Elliot," she touched his arm, stilling his movement. "Breathe. It's just me." "That's the problem," he said softly. "It's you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. For weeks they'd been careful, polite, focused on the children and the delicate work of rebuilding trust. But underneath it all, the attraction that had brought them together in Miami still hummed between them like a live wire. Dinner was simple but thoughtful. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a salad with homemade dressing. They ate on the deck under the string lights, talking about everything and nothing. The girl's progress in preschool, his latest projects at work, her plans to return to school for her master's degree. "You want to go back to school?" he asked, refilling her wine glass. "I've been thinking about it. The girls will be in kindergarten soon, and I could use the credentials for better freelance opportunities. What would you study?" "Artificial intelligence ethics. The field has exploded since Miami, and there's real work to be done in making sure technology serves humanity rather than the other way around." The passion in her voice reminded him of the woman he'd fallen in love with. Brilliant, driven, unafraid to tackle the world's biggest problems. "That's expensive," he said carefully. "I'll figure it out. Student loans, part-time programs, whatever it takes. I could help." "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "I mean, thank you, but I need to do this myself." He nodded, understanding. She'd built her independence through necessity, and she wasn't ready to give it up, even for practical reasons. "What if it wasn't help?" he asked. "What if it was investment?" "Investment in what?" "In us, in our future, in building something together." The conversation had shifted into dangerous territory. They were no longer talking about education or money. They were talking about commitment, about the possibility of a shared life. "Elliot, I love you," he said simply. "I know I don't have the right to say that yet. I know I need to earn it back, but I love you. I love the mother you've become, the woman you've always been, the future I want to build with you." The confession hung in the warm evening air like a promise. She'd known it was coming, had felt it in the way he looked at her, the careful attention he paid to everything she said. but hearing it spoken aloud made it real, undeniable. "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped loving you, even when I hated you." The admission broke something open between them. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his, and she didn't pull away. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. Last time. Won't happen again. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. I can promise to choose you, choose us every day for the rest of my life." The words were a vow, a commitment deeper than any legal document. She looked at him across the table, this man who'd learned to braid hair and build forts, who'd given up deals to read bedtime stories, who'd transformed his entire life around the possibility of being worthy of their love. "Show me," she said, echoing her words from the pavilion. But this time, the challenge was different. This time, she was asking him to show her what surrender looked like, what it meant to love without reservation or fear. He stood slowly, extending his hand to her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She followed him inside, up the stairs to his bedroom. The space was warm, intimate, filled with soft lamplight that turned everything golden. He'd thought of everything: candles on the dresser, soft music playing from hidden speakers, windows open to let in the evening breeze. "You planned this," she said, not accusingly but with wonder. "I hoped," he corrected. "I hoped we'd get here eventually." He touched her face with reverent fingers, like she was something precious he'd been afraid he'd lost forever. When he kissed her, it was with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, who wanted to savor every moment, every sensation. This was different from their desperate encounter in the airplane galley. This was worship, devotion, the physical expression of promises they'd been too afraid to speak. He undressed her slowly, his hands mapping territory that was familiar but somehow new, changed by time and experience and the weight of everything they'd learned about love. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against her throat. "More beautiful than I remembered. I'm different now. I know. So am I." And he was. The urgent, almost desperate lover from Miami had been replaced by someone who understood that true intimacy required patience, vulnerability, the courage to be completely present with another person. When he finally moved over her, into her, it was with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't conquest or possession. This was communion, two people choosing to be vulnerable together, to surrender control and trust in something bigger than themselves. They moved together slowly, reverently, relearning the rhythm they'd shared years ago but tempered now with maturity and intention. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow, every whispered word a commitment to the future they were building together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft lamplight, her head on his chest, his fingers threading through her hair. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt something inside her chest finally relax. "This doesn't erase the past," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "But maybe it lets us build something new, something better, something real." Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but inside this room, time felt suspended. They had work to do, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, a family to become. But lying herein, the aftermath of surrender, surrounded by the scent of her skin and the warmth of her body against his, Elliot finally understood what his mother had meant. Love was the only risk worth taking, and this time, he wasn't going to let fear make the choice for him. Naira woke to the sound of muffled giggles and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The sheets were softer than hers, the morning light fell differently across the room, and there was a warmth beside her that she hadn't felt in years. Then memory flooded back. Elliot's house, his bed, the way he'd touched her like she was something precious he'd been afraid he'd lost forever. She turned to find his side of the bed empty, but still warm, the pillow bearing the impression of his head. Through the partially open door, she could hear voices from downstairs, his deeper tone mixing with the twins' excited chatter. "Mama's still sleeping," Raya's voice carried clearly. "Should we wake her up?" "Let her rest," Elliot replied gently. "She works very hard taking care of you girls, but we want to show her the eggs. The eggs will still be there when she wakes up." Naira smiled against the pillow. They'd collected eggs from the small chicken coop he'd installed in the back corner of his garden, another surprise addition that had appeared after their first dinner together. The girls had been fascinated by the hens, naming them all and insisting on daily visits to check for treasures. She found her clothes scattered across the floor, memories of how they'd gotten there making her cheeks warm. The woman who'd undressed in this room last night felt like a stranger, confident, desired, willing to take risks with her heart. In the harsh light of morning, Doubts crept in like shadows. What happened now? Did she gather the girls and pretend last night had been a beautiful mistake? Did she stay and try to build something real from the ashes of what they'd once had? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Coffee," Elliot's voice called through the door. "And something that might pass for breakfast if you're feeling charitable." She wrapped herself in his robe, soft cotton that smelled like him, and opened the door. He stood in the hallway holding a tray, already dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still mussed from sleep. The domestic scene was so natural, so right, that it made her chest ache with longing. "The girls?" she asked, accepting the coffee gratefully, collecting eggs and arguing about whether chickens dream. Rena thinks they dream about corn. Rhea insists it's worms. Important philosophical questions. "The most important," he agreed, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "How are you feeling?" The question carried weight beyond casual morning after politeness. He was asking about her heart, her fears, her willingness to step into the unknown territory they'd entered together. "Scared," she admitted. "But good scared, if that makes sense." Perfect sense. They sat together by the window, sharing toast and watching the girls through the glass. Rhea had convinced one of the hens to sit in her lap while Rena sketched the scene in a small notebook, her tongue poking out in concentration. "They're happy here," Naira observed. "Are you?" The question was simple, but she knew it wasn't really about the house or the morning or even the night they'd shared. It was about the life he was offering, the future they could build together. "I think I could be," she said carefully. "What would it take?" She sipped her coffee, considering. Time, patience. The knowledge that when things get difficult, and they will get difficult, you won't run. "I won't run." You say that now. But what happens when the girls are sick and cranky and you've got an important meeting? What happens when I'm stressed about money and taking it out on you? What happens when the honeymoon phase ends and we're just us? The questions came from a place of deep vulnerability. She'd been hurt before, had learned not to trust promises made in moments of passion. But she also knew that fear could be as dangerous as recklessness, that protecting herself from pain might also protect her from joy. "Then we figure it out," he said simply. "Together. It's not that easy." "No, it's not. But it's worth trying." Before she could respond, the girls burst through the back door, their voices carrying clearly through the house. "Mama, Mama, the chickens made us breakfast." "We're coming," Elliot called back, standing and extending his hand to her, ready to face the day. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the life he was offering. Not perfect, not without risk, but real and warm, and filled with the possibility of happiness. "Ready," she said, taking his hand. The crisis came, as crises always do, at the worst possible moment. 2 weeks later, Naira was rushing to get the girls ready for school when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Elliot's assistant, which immediately sent alarm bells through her system. He never had Margaret call unless something was seriously wrong. "Miss Chen? I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Vaughn is in the hospital." The words hit her like a physical blow. What happened? There was an accident. A car ran a red light and hit his cab. He's conscious and stable, but they're keeping him for observation. "Which hospital?" "Mount Sinai." "He's asking for you." The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic and fear. She'd left the girls with her neighbor, promising to explain everything later, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if he was more seriously hurt than they were saying? What if she lost him just as she'd found him again? She found him in the emergency department, propped up in a bed with a bandaged head and his left arm in a sling. Despite the injuries, he was on his phone, clearly in the middle of a business call. "I don't care about the Tokyo meeting," he was saying. "Reschedule it, Elliot." She appeared at his bedside, and relief flooded his features. "I'll call you back," he told whoever was on the other end, hanging up immediately. "Are you okay?" "Margaret said there was an accident." "I'm fine. Bruised, shaken up, but fine." He reached for her with his good hand, and she let him pull her closer. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. What happened?" "Wrong place, wrong time. I was coming back from a meeting and some idiot ran a red light." He studied her face, noting the fear in her eyes. "Hey, I'm okay. I promise. You could have been killed. But I wasn't." The simple statement didn't diminish the terror that had gripped her during the drive over. She'd realized with crystal clarity that the idea of losing him was unbearable, not just for the girls, but for herself. Somewhere in the past month, he'd become essential to her happiness in ways she'd been afraid to acknowledge. "Don't do that again," she said, trying to make light of it. "I'll do my best to avoid future car accidents. I'm serious. I can't." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Can't what?" "Can't do this without you. Not anymore." The admission hung between them like a bridge. She'd spent so long protecting herself, maintaining her independence, keeping part of her heart in reserve. But sitting beside his hospital bed, she realized that safety was an illusion. Love required vulnerability, and vulnerability required trust. "You won't have to," he said softly. "Promise me." "I promise." The words were interrupted by the arrival of a harried-looking doctor with a clipboard and the kind of expression that suggested he'd been dealing with difficult patients all day. "Mr. Vaughn, I have your discharge papers, but I need to go over the follow-up instructions." As the doctor explained wound care and medication schedules, Naira found herself automatically taking notes, asking questions about recovery time and warning signs. It was only when she caught Elliot watching her with a soft smile that she realized what she was doing. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just thank you." "For what?" "For caring, for being here, for becoming part of my life." The words made her chest tight with emotion. She'd spent so long focused on protecting herself and the girls that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a team, to have someone who would be there for her the way she was there for them. "I should call the girls," she said. "They'll want to know you're okay." "Actually," he said, looking suddenly nervous, "there's something I need to tell you first." "What?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about running when things get difficult, about proving I'm in this for the long haul. Elliot, I want to ask you to move in with me." The request hung in the air between them like a challenge. She'd expected many things from this conversation, but not this. Not such a definitive step toward a shared future. "The girls love the house," he continued, the words coming faster now. "There's room for everyone, good schools nearby, and I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to be there for bedtime stories and middle-of-the-night fevers and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life." "That's a big step." "I know, but I'm ready for it. The question is, are you?" She looked at him lying in the hospital bed, bandaged and bruised, but absolutely sincere in his proposal. 6 months ago, she would have said no automatically. Too fast, too risky, too much potential for heartbreak. But 6 months ago, she'd been a different person. A woman who'd been hurt and had learned to protect herself above all else. Today, she was a woman who'd remembered what it felt like to be loved completely, to trust someone with her heart and her children's future. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Of course, and we'll need to talk to the girls." "Absolutely, and I'll need my own space, not just a drawer in your dresser, but actual space that's mine. Whatever you need, and I'm still going back to school. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't want you to give up your dreams." She studied his face, looking for any sign of hesitation or doubt. But all she saw was hope, patience, and the kind of love that had learned to wait for the right moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? Okay, let's try it. Let's see if we can build something real together." The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his bruised features into something beautiful. He reached for her with his good hand, pulling her down for a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too." And for the first time in 4 years, she meant it without reservation, without fear, without the careful hedging that had protected her heart but also limited her happiness. Outside the hospital window, the city hummed with its usual energy. But inside this small room, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of medical equipment, 2 people were choosing to build something extraordinary from the ordinary materials of forgiveness, trust, and hope. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, disagreements, moments when the weight of blending their lives felt overwhelming. But they would face it together, as a family, with the kind of love that had learned to choose connection over safety, vulnerability over protection. The choice to stay was also the choice to grow, to become more than the sum of their individual parts. And as Naira helped Elliot navigate the hospital discharge process, fielding calls from concerned assistants and making arrangements for his recovery, she realized that this was what partnership looked like. Not the loss of independence, but the multiplication of strength. Not the end of individual dreams, but the beginning of shared ones. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to be a family. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Brooklyn Heights brownstone, illuminating a scene of beautiful chaos. Raya sat at the counter, tongue poking out in concentration as she attempted to flip pancakes with more enthusiasm than skill. Rena was at the table, sketching the chickens she could see through the back door, while Elliot stood behind her, gently guiding her hand to capture the curve of a wing. "Mama, I think I broke the pancake," Raya announced, holding up what could generously be called abstract art. "Looks perfect to me," Naira said, emerging from the home office that had once been a guest room. Her laptop was tucked under her arm, and she wore the satisfied expression of someone who'd just submitted a particularly challenging assignment. "Done with class for the day?" Elliot asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "For now. Professor Martinez wants us to read 3 more papers on algorithmic bias before Thursday." "Sounds thrilling." "It actually is," she said, leaning back against his chest. "I never thought I'd be excited about homework again." The transition to graduate school had been smoother than she'd expected. Between Elliot's support and the girls' enthusiasm for their new routine, she'd found her rhythm. Some days were harder than others, juggling coursework with motherhood while navigating the complexities of blended family life, but they'd made it work. "Speaking of exciting," Elliot said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "I have news. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. The Tokyo office wants me to visit next month to finalize the sustainability initiative." A year ago, the announcement would have sent ice through her veins. Business trips had been the beginning of the end for them before. But this man was different from the one who'd chosen deals over love, who'd seen family as a complication rather than a priority. "How long?" she asked. 4 days. "But I was thinking, maybe we could all go. The girls would love Tokyo, and you could visit the AI research labs at the university. All of us? All of us. We're a package deal now, remember?" The certainty in his voice made her heart sing. He'd kept every promise he'd made, had chosen them over business opportunities more times than she could count. When Rena had been sick with flu, he'd canceled 3 meetings to stay home with her. When Raya had broken her arm at the Code playground, he'd been the one to carry her to the emergency room, while Naira followed behind with insurance cards and comfort snacks. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms. "I love you too. Even when I'm stressed about deadlines? Especially then. Even when the girls put glitter in your hair? That was one time, and it was surprisingly festive. Even when I burn dinner and we have to order pizza? The pizza place knows us by name now. I consider that a win." She laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. This was their life now. Imperfect, complicated, absolutely wonderful. They'd built something extraordinary from the ashes of what they'd lost, something stronger because it had been tested by time and forgiveness. "Mama, Elliot," Raya called from the stove. "The pancakes are ready." "Coming, sweetheart." They moved as a unit toward the table, where misshapen pancakes and burnt edges would be declared the best breakfast ever, where 4 people who'd found each other against all odds would start another ordinary, extraordinary day. Love had been worth the risk after all. Thank you for tuning in, my beautiful family of love and twilights. Sometimes the best love stories are the ones that teach us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, connection over safety, and forever over convenience.